Welcome to the Grimfrost Podcast. Today's guest, for the second time by popular demand, is Anders Kaliff, professor of archaeology at Uppsala University in Sweden and expert in Indo-Europeans. So welcome back to our longhouse. You're the very first guest that we've had here twice.
Oh, I'm very honored to hear that,
Yeah.
really, and I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, because your last episode was so popular that we had to have you back, obviously.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I shouldn't say I'm surprised, but I am actually surprised. But it's apparently a fascinating topic, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, people loved it, and I thought it was a very exciting episode to do as well, because we touch on so many interesting aspects of your research, I think, and that's it was amazing. So, I mean, your area of expertise is so interesting and vast, and I mean, we could never fully explore it, I guess. But
take some time if we should do it all through.
Exactly. But last time we talked about the Indo-Europeans and their influence on the Norse culture, such as wolf warriors and the importance of the horse and the northern gods and the response was incredible. But just to get into it, like just to start off, like to explain to people, because we're going to touch upon it later as well.
Yeah.
Who were the Indo-Europeans?
Yes, I mean, that is the basic question when it comes to this. And the Indo-Europeans, to take it shortly, it's actually the first Indo-Europeans that we call that. It's people on the steppes north of today's Caspian and Black Sea area, and today's eastern Ukraine, Russia, the area where they fight today, unfortunately, but also parts of Central Asia. Kazakhstan is also remains, and they lived there for a little more than 5,000 years ago, and some 100 years on, and around 3,000 before BC, they started to move. First, actually, far east to the Altai region in eastern Russia, in Siberia, and border to Mongolia, actually. And that was about 3,200 BC, and 3,000 or 2,950 BC to be exactly, according to C14 dating. They quite fast they moved westwards to Europe and arrived in today's Germany, Poland, also a little later in Jutland in Denmark, today's Sweden as well, and also Western Europe, as the battle axe culture, or corded ware culture it's called in continental. But they were semi-nomadic cattle herding people living on the steppe from the beginning.
Yeah. So we had this super interesting talk, and I just wanted to how did it feel to get so much attention regarding your research?
I'm sincerely very happy about it, because, you know, as a researcher, a scholar, sometimes when you think yourself you have a very interesting topic, and then it's so enigmatic for the broader audience, so it's hard to get it out there. But apparently this with the warriors, the wolf warriors and the Indo-Europeans, it was catching somehow, and I'm happy about that, because I sincerely believe this is a topic that has had quite an influential part of European prehistory, and also to shape today's society, if you look in the long perspective. So, but it's seldom you have that kind of audience, really. if I talk to a group of people in real life, so to speak, and if I have a couple of hundreds, that is really much.
Yeah. So, but would you say it's difficult for academics to reach a broader audience, or?
I think it depends. It's both, really. We have quite a good situation as archaeologists today, historians also, but they are sometimes more careful about the sources and such. Archaeologists, for good and bad, we have a better situation. We can afford to be a little bit more speculative, but in a good way, I think, because then we could also draw the picture more clearly and also take out the long lines of history and how things are connect the dots all together. So I think today it's actually quite a broad interest. So it depends a lot of the context and how you label things. I think if you look at the television programs, like in Sweden, there's been a series about the Swedish prehistory quite recently and so on. It has a huge number of people looking at it and also commenting on it. So and some books also sell a lot.
Yeah, of course. But we're going to talk about something a little bit different today, and I think we have a really interesting part in front of us. Because there's a bunch of stuff that we wanted to talk to you a little bit specifically. But I happen to know that one of your favorite themes to talk about is Christmas, or Yule, as it's called here in Sweden. Still, it's the heathen name. I know this is, as I said, it's a favorite topic of yours, but where does the name Yule come from to begin with?
Yes, then we start with a real enigma, really, because as you mentioned, it's called Yule here in Sweden and in Norway, Denmark, actually in Finland as well, more or less. And nobody actually knows the meaning of the word. We know that it is from prehistoric times, from the Viking period at least, and it's mentioned then first time, or at least the most cited part is from when it is about Harald Fairhair, the Norwegian king who united Norway, when it said he is celebrating Yule out on the sea, and that is and he's drinking Yule. That is important, because that is the expression that you drink Yule. And when he did that, it's described as that is an anomaly. You shouldn't do it out on sea, and in that kind of context, Yule is something you did at home, at the farmstead or the court of the king, I suppose. Then, so that was mentioned in such a context, and it's not really mentioned what the meaning of it is, but it's apparently an important thing that you should celebrate, and it's also located on the same time of the year, of course, as we have today, the winter solstice, or around that period, and it's apparently so important in the old religion that this name is kept also into the Christian period. Because if you look at other European countries, also Indo-European countries like Germany, where you have the Weihnacht, and England and States, of course, with Christmas, that is the name we will use here also when we talk about it, to know what it is, what time of year. And then it's, of course, referred to Christ and to the birth of Christ. And that's a story in itself, how that come to be. But we can.
But then again, also in English, it's also called Yuletide.
Yes, Yuletide. Yeah, and that is, of course, the same word. So it's living there also, probably because of the Northmen in England and during the Viking period. Maybe also with connections back to a more deeper Germanic Anglo-Saxon root, or because it's probable that this word was it occurred in many Germanic, at least Germanic languages, in one or another form then, but it's preserved in Scandinavia, probably as one of the. I remember last time I was here, we talked about this, the continuing reminiscences of the old religion in later periods when it comes to cultic places, church places, and so on. And this is, I would say, most certainly one of the things that was so important in the old religion, that the church actually, either they didn't want to change the name or they couldn't change the name because it was so deeply rooted in the minds of people.
I also heard that, and you may correct me if this is wrong, but I heard that the very fact that we do celebrate Christmas in, well, let's say the Western world now, which is where we are, is very much thanks to especially the Vikings, especially Swedish Vikings, as far as I understood it. I'm not sure if this is correct.
It might well be correct, but I also I think that if we look at the very much related people, we start with the Germanic tribes of Northern Europe that we can distinguish from before the beginning of our era in the last centuries of the pre-Christian era. Probably among all those people, and maybe Celtic groups as well, you had a celebration at that time of year that was probably, in the Germanic case, I can't prove it, but it was probably named some variation of what is becoming Yule.
Okay.
But of course, during the Viking Age, when the Scandinavian people expanded and had such an influence, this was probably strengthened, and it might be, as you said, that it was actually called something else before in those areas, and that it was taking over the Scandinavian name. But this very enigmatic name that it is used in the Viking period, we don't know what its meaning is in the Viking period and not today. That indicates that it's something far older than the Viking Age, actually.
Yeah, because I think that's very interesting, but I was actually thinking, because so the theory I heard is that when they wanted to christen the Scandinavian countries, it was obviously the Catholic Church, and the main holiday or the main celebration in Catholicism, if I'm not mistaken, is Easter.
Yeah, it is.
So the reason why Christmas became such a big holiday, supposedly then, is because the Vikings didn't want to give up their Yule celebrations.
No, and that is most probably the case. Then it's necessary also to see that this happened also earlier in the continent, maybe already from the Roman times, because the Romans had this sun celebration on the 25th of December.
And they had the Saturnalia as well.
Yeah, they had. And in the late Roman period, it was also connected to the cult of Mithras. That was the sun also. It was a connection there. And that was on the 25th. And of course, when the early church, when they made the birth of Christ for the 25th, that was connected to this. Actually, nobody knows when the birth, and in the earliest centuries, the original church, they actually didn't mention that, so it comes later when they located. And then it was, of course, connected also to this North European Germanic winter solstice festivity that Yule is then. So it was transformed into the Christian part, and of course today a lot. Around Christmas, in Sweden at least, you can read a lot of folklorists in newspapers. They try to explain the Yule celebration as something quite late, and it was important. The Christmas decorations, they were important in later times and so on. And I would say, I shouldn't say it's rubbish, because that seems rude, but they miss they sometimes throw
You can say that here, that's fine.
Yeah. I think it's rubbish, actually. But I think we should turn this around, because a lot of the things, like how Santa Claus, tomten in Sweden, how it's used as the person giving the presents for Christmas, of course, that is late. And it was actually the Christmas bock, julebocken, that made it early, like in Finland.
Yeah, which is still the name of Santa Claus in Finland.
Yeah.
Joulupukki.
And that's interesting, because as late as in the 19th century, when they started with this present giving, then it was in many cases julbocken.
The Yule goat.
The Yule goat, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that was the word. It becomes a little Swedish.
And he wasn't really particularly nice all the time either.
No, he wasn't. And I think we talked last time about the similarities and also connection between the Krampus figure in South German, Austrian tradition. That is more or less the same figure as the Yule goat in Scandinavia. So that is one part of the tomten, but also the Christmas decorations. Like the goat today, it's more or less this figure that you make out of the
straw. Yeah.
Of the straw, yes. And the straw, as such, has a long tradition. That was actually one of the most important traditions in the old farming communities of Scandinavia. When you on the 21st of December, St. Thomas Day, when they also tasted the Christmas beer for the first time, then they spread this Christmas straw on the floor of their farm houses. Then, and that was a big thing, because that was the remains of the harvest of the year, and it was also very significant. It was of course a decoration that we don't have today, but today we have combined it as this goat figure made of straw instead. But the Christmas straw, that is very interesting, because it's also connected to, I think, one of the main reasons why we celebrate Christmas from the beginning, because that is the connection to the dead. Because because many things point at the Christmas time as especially associated with the dead relatives, because on the 21st of December, when they put the straw and they drank the beer, at that time they thought that the good dead from the farms, the early generations, they came back to the farmhouse, and the people of the farm, they didn't sleep in their beds. They made up their beds for the dead. And they slept in the hay on the floor, and they put out the Christmas food and drink and everything, and it should be standing all overnight also, because the dead were supposed to eat there during the night time when the living people were sleeping. And this is of course not known basically from the prehistoric times, but it's known from very well documented and very old folk traditions from different parts of Scandinavia. That is for sure not something that was brought into these farming communities in later periods, because it was very much detested by the church, and it is actually described by some priests who described this as old belief that was not supposed to be.
But it's interesting, because obviously that lived on for a long time. I mean, even my grandmother, she would put a bowl of porridge out.
Yes.
Outside by the barn. She lived on a farm up north, and she would put it on Christmas. They would put a bowl of porridge out. But I just thought of this actually, and I'm not sure I ever made the connection. But now that we have the popular culture coming here from the United States, where kids leave milk and cookies for Santa, is that the same mentality? Or the same idea, but that transformed, instead of giving it to the dead, they give it to Santa?
I think so, because it's probably went maybe through the immigrants to the States in the 19th century and so, and then it was transformed a little bit, maybe mixed up, and then now it comes back, but it's probably part of the old tradition. I have that tradition myself, and to be honest, I actually put out the porridge every Christmas Eve still today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I my daughter, who is turning 13 now, I'm an old father. I explain this to her, so hopefully she will have it in, because I have it in living tradition. So my aunt, actually, when I was a kid, she actually believed in all this, and she saw the tomten, and she saw the elves, and she saw...
My grandmother did too.
Yeah, they did in those days.
Yes, definitely so.
I hope I would see them one day as well.
Yeah, maybe you will. So, what do we know about the pre-Christian Yule celebration then?
It's actually it's like with the Indo-European things that I explained before. You have to make you have a jigsaw of a lot of different sources, and especially folkloristic things from later periods that could be triangulated into a picture that I think could be quite realistic, actually, because we don't have very much about it, what the meaning was in the pre-Christian times. We know that it was a drinking celebration for the ancestors. Sometimes they had the ancestors toast, and also to the gods, and that has actually been preserved in not least Norwegian folk beliefs in places like Setesdal, Telemark, and at the west coast, also in more isolated areas, where they actually had these drinking festivities to the homestead fire, where they had this strange, not very well known, but they thought there were living spirits or beings in the fire. A female one that was called Eldbjörg, and a male one that was good enough here, Eldgrim, so like in Grimfrost.
Yes.
But it was not frost, it was
course.
fire.
Yeah, it was fire, Grim fire.
And so they actually, and that was not only on Christmas, they did it during weekdays, also Thursdays mainly, because that seems to have been a very important day in the folk tradition, probably going back to the pagan times. And it's also described that you should drink to this, you should pour some spirit to the fire to feed or to give, like a sacrifice to these beings, in the same way as you give it to tomten and to the people living in the soil of the farm. And at the same time you were also drinking for the dead ancestors. And in the way I and my Norwegian colleague Terje Østgaard, I mentioned him last time also because we have written a lot together. We have the good combination. He has his family is from Setesdal in Norway, and mine is from northern Småland and southern Östergötland. Two quite good areas when it comes to a lot of remaining folkloristic stuff of this kind. And we have tried to put this together, and we see a lot of similarities also, not the things we heard ourselves, but I mean it's a lot of documentations from the 19th, 20th century also about it. Then we can see that this is something, the connection to the dead, the drinking to the dead, and the sacrifices in Norway, many times the burial mound or the farm that was supposed to be the first farmer on this particular place that was then transferred. And he was, of course, one of the persons coming on Christmas also, but also during Thursdays they sacrificed on this grave mound. So all of this, it would be quite improbable that this had turned out to be the same traditions in two quite distant areas in Scandinavia, even if that is relatively close, look in the Indo-European context. But during later periods, when it was actually the church was very, very hostile to this altogether. So it's I can't. The very best idea is that this is a very good reminiscence from the old tradition and a very important one.
Yeah. So, what about the Viking Age Yule then was influenced by the Indo-Europeans? Do we know that?
We don't know that for certain, but there is a good hypothesis why that could be so. Because, I've talked earlier about the Yamnaya people, the first Indo-Europeans from the steppe. But it's never a easy solution in archaeology that can't be complicated, and so it's so in this case also, because the Indo-Europeans, they went in both directions quite early, but when they came to Europe and met the corded ware battle axe culture, they mixed also with the earlier Neolithic farmers of Europe that were still already living there, and from that connection there were another migration, quite large. In today's northern Ukraine, it's called the Middle Dnieper culture. It's no better name for it, and it's transferring both of these cultures up in the forest region of today's Russia, Belarus, and eastern Lithuania, where they formed something that is called in Russian the Fatyanovo culture, and that is a part of the battle axe culture, but an eastern variant, and that stretches all the way to Ural. So it is actually an eastern migration after the western migration that brings also genetic and also cultural traits from Neolithic Europe also back to Ural. And from Ural they go south again, down to the steppe once again.
Okay.
Meet their second cousins from Yamnaya that is still living there, and they form yet another very important culture that is called the Sintashta culture. I think I mentioned it a year ago also. But
Okay, yeah.
that's where they actually domesticate the horses that are still, all of the living domesticated horses in the world today, they are from Sintashta. And Sintashta is furthermore the place where they invented the two-wheel chariot that was so important. Earlier they thought that was in the Middle East, but it wasn't. It was around 2100 BC in Sintashta on the steppe. They were also quite keen on metallurgy, and it's probably from there that the metallurgic techniques were transmitted to Europe to shape the first Bronze Age here. At least it was influencing, and also in a little later period to China actually. But furthermore, in Sintashta, from there you have the expansion down in the Indo-European area. So there, the Aryans that I talked about, not so very strange in that times, because they were actually calling themselves Aryans. That was the name, and that is, as I think I explained last year. And for them, people wondering when they listen to this, it was of course used and misused in later research.
Yes.
But they came and shaped the old Vedic Indic culture of northern India, and also the earliest Iranian culture, and brought the language. And when they came there, they seemed to have had this winter solstice things with them. They had also the celebration of with fire as a ritual equipment. They had cremation with them, and that was not the case on Yamnaya, on the steppe earlier. So all of these seems to have been created somewhere along the road from Eastern Europe, when they met the corded ware met the Neolithic farmers up in the north and down to the steppe again. And if you look at this winter solstice, it doesn't have a meaning in India, at least not in southern India.
No.
But still today there are rituals connected to it. And at least my hypothesis, and Terje and me, we have written a book that is called Indo-European Fire Rituals. It's a Routledge book published in England a couple of years ago. And there we put forward the hypothesis or theory, actually, because we have quite strong support, I think, for it, that this was actually created in the Fatyanovo up in the northern forest region. And then it spread towards the Baltic area, and from there also to Scandinavia, and more to and down to India. And that's why we have this close connection also between rituals in the Vedic and Indic and early Iranian, and the Balto-Slavic and the Scandinavian area also.
Okay.
Complicated, but
but it was fascinating, because like it's really interesting that it kind of comes from the steppes to Europe and then goes back and down to India and then through Iran and like Persia and back to Europe again.
Yeah, and all of this, the Yamnaya, it's only 10 years, when we started, it started to being possible to talk about the Indo-Europeans in this way again. It was an old research, but that was a long time ago. And first, most researchers thought, now it's all set, it's Yamnaya, and then it expands like this.
Yeah.
But then in 2021, this new study came that showed this Fatianovo thing, and that actually, first it made things more blurry and diffuse, and it disturbed the picture, so to speak. But when you look closer to it, you have a lot of other things that get explanation there, because you have all this. One thing is that in this early step, you shouldn't have so much emphasis on agriculture, but there are actually in the Indo-European vocabulary common words for agricultural things that shouldn't be there in this. So that is probably brought from Neolithic Europe, and then from there down to the Indic, Iranian, and also in the Balto-Slavic. And I think that this is also the case for a lot of the rituals that are connected to the winter period, because in the southern regions, in India, in Iran, and southern Europe, it's not so relevant, actually.
No, I was going to say that, because like in India, well, the perception anyways for me is that the climate is very stable. The seasons don't change that much.
Not in that way, at least.
No.
They have the monsoon and everything,
Yeah.
but it's different.
Yes. So it would make sense that, especially when it comes to the sun, and a solstice celebration would be more important here up north
Yes.
than further south.
It's definitely so. So, of course, we can't prove that it was actually in the Fatianovo, but if you search for a missing link in the context that we know of today, we don't know, maybe there will be even more interesting new things in the Indo-European flora here, but I think that today it's the best suggestion how this occurred and why it took on this very, very important shape. And then it's also important to say that in Scandinavia, of course, that is a northern area. This has then, of course, lived the life of its own as language, as other things do, and it has probably been developed to be even more important in the long run, because here you were absolutely dependent on the agriculture, that everything went well during the summer period, and then you could hopefully have another good year after.
So what about what is there anything in the modern Christian tradition that has survived from the Indo-Europeans or the Vikings, apart from putting out milk and cookies to Santa? do we know any? Are there any specific rituals or cultural phenomena that we still practice today?
Well, if you look at the Christmas celebrations, the Yule celebrations, then it's actually more hard to find any really true Christian things in it. But you have it because you have put the birth of Christ there. So you have this, the tradition of Christ being born in the stable, and actually a lot of folklorists, they say about the Christmas straw that is put on. No, they do it to celebrate that Christ was born on straw, they say. But I would say that is, you make it too simple and too easy. That is not the case, really. You can read it. There is a very famous, not so very well known, but famous description from a priest whose name was Gaslander from Middle Småland in West Pohära, that was written in 1774. He had things he heard in his parish in the 1740s. And there he describes in detail why they did this, and also that they expected the dead coming back, and that was the case, why they should do this. So it's as when folklorists also say that the Christmas tree, it came from Germany in the 18th century. And that is true for this bourgeoisie tradition with decorating it as we do today. But, many hundred years ago, they had this Yule stone. That was the same kind of tree standing out in front of the farmhouse. So this kind of decorations, they had a place there. What we don't have so much today is the fire, because we don't have the fireplaces in the houses so common. But the Yule log or the Yule fire.
That is still a very common thing in English-speaking countries. I think in the United States especially, but also in the UK, I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, because the expression, at least, I don't know, and I think that is quite genuine also.
They even made it into a bread these days, that when you come to a Christmas party, you bring the Yule log, but it's
okay, yeah,
or at least it rings a bell. I'm gonna say I'm not 100% sure of that, but I've heard that somewhere. Or
no, but you might be right, because that. Then I must tell another thing. But just I just finished this about the Yule log, because in the old, it was you shouldn't touch the fire then during so they had this. The tradition is that you put in a large log that you could push into the fire. It burns and you push it in. So it was a sacred fire, really.
Okay.
During Christmas. So during this period, because the Christmas was not only Christmas Eve, it was not only a few days as it is today. It was all the time between the 21st of December until the sometimes it is what is 13 days in English.
Yeah, but 13 days.
The 13th day after Christmas.
Yeah.
When and sometimes the 20 days, because you have 20, the 20th day Knut. The Knut is a special date or day in Sweden. And until that date, the dead were in the house. And then they had this the soul travel day. It was called Själafarardagen, where they actually took the bros and they chased the dead out and said, "Go back to your graves, go back to the graves, go back, you elves and dead people, to your graves." And then the Christmas was over.
Oh, okay.
So during that time they were there, and then the fire should of course be kept alive during that time, and that was also the period that the Christmas beer was, because on 20 Knut, the Knut day, then the old men in the village, they had a party, and then they drank the last of the Yule beer.
See, that's fascinating. I just had to ask this because it just popped up into my head now. I know there's something in Germany they call it a Schwedenfeuer. Have you ever heard of this?
Not Schwedenfeuer. I've heard about a lot of Sweden traditions.
So apparently this is something they call a Schwedenfeuer, and it is a log that you cut across. You cut a cross.
Then I know. Then I know. I've done it myself.
Yeah. So would that be a similar thing as a Yule log, or is it something completely different?
I think it's something different, maybe inspired, because the Yule log in the original way, that was something you had it so it stuck out of the open chimney, and then you pushed it. It burnt, and then you pushed it inwards, so it burnt all the time. So it was, but of course we have all these fire traditions, and in the earlier days, today we have it on Valborg, that is like Beltane in the Celtic tradition at the 30th of April or 1st of May, and in Norway on Midsummer's Eve, actually Sankt Hans afton, that is called in Norway, where you have the fires. But
and also Finland, actually, Midsummer's.
Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, and in west coast of Sweden, but that is the old Norwegian. But earlier they actually have this kind of fires on more occasions, and they had it also on Christmas. Actually, we know that. So it was probably on Midsummer, on Christmas or winter solstice, and in springtime. How do we know that? Yeah, I was when I work on my thesis in the 90s. I studied cremation burial customs and fire rituals, and that was how I started to get into the Indo-Europeans once again. As I explained last time, I had an interest from the beginning, but I was advised not to go into it in those days. But I couldn't avoid it. But then I had an old man who actually sent me some letters he had got from relatives in the States that was sent in, I think, the 1880s or 1890s, when they asked, because this family, they came from a village only 10 kilometers from where I came from, and my mother's father's ancestors, they were on the next farm actually. So I felt it's quite interesting. He sent me, and there the people in the States, they ask, did you light the Christmas fires as usual out on the fields? And then I checked this up, and that was actually a thing that they did, probably to make the sun come again, because the fire has, of course, in this old Indo-European tradition also, it's like the equivalent of the sun, and it's the way to bring back the fertility, the heat and the sunshine once again, because during winter solstice, if we would be far north in Sweden, we shouldn't have the sun at all, but of course here we have it. I saw a glimpse of it today.
Yes, me too, actually.
Yeah.
So these are all like super interesting traditions, but are there any traditions from the Viking Age or the Indo-European times that you wish that we'd bring back?
Actually, I think we have a lot still. So because that is, the longer I live, the more convinced I am actually that we partly live the Viking Age still today, but we are not aware of it. But a tricky question. I'm quite fond of drinking beer in Christmas myself, so drinking beer is nothing new.
We still do that. Yeah. So all right, let's rephrase the question.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite Yule or Christmas tradition that you always do with your family, which we can link back to the Viking Age?
Yeah, I do this porridge thing, as I said, so that is one thing. Of course, the Santa Claus and everything, we have to have that. But I am also quite fond of, actually, today we all go on All Hallows Eve or Allhelgona to decorate the graves in Sweden. But until my childhood, it was not that day. And I know Terje said the same thing about Norway. They went on Christmas. And I do that myself. I think that is a good tradition, because that is something that to take on this old tradition, that it's actually about the forefathers, the generations before. And I'm not scared about this tradition of the dead people. When I looked into it, I try to imagine that my dead relatives, the people I knew from childhood, that they are actually there somewhere.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is a good, nice tradition.
We actually do that as well in our family, but we do both All Hallows Eve and
we too,
and Christmas.
too.
But those two always go to graves on those days and to light candles. So it's a beautiful tradition, and it's lovely when you go to the cemeteries to see all these candles.
Yeah, and of course it's lovely in All Hallows Eve also when you see it, because there's so many lights, and I think it's a festivity of light. But for me, Christmas, the more I learned about it, and sometimes it rang a bell, I think, in me when I first read about all these traditions about the dead and Christmas, because I've been becoming more and more convinced that the traditions about the dead and their impact on creating new fertility for the coming year and for the living, that is actually one of the core things about the pagan or pre-Christian Christmas tradition. And we have it in so many things, the decoration of the graves, of course, and this tradition of the dead coming to the farmsteads. But also in transmitted traditions. There is this you have this Yule mass on the morning, the julotta in Sweden and Scandinavia, where traditionally it was at 4 o'clock in the morning or even earlier. Sometimes I think today when people want to sleep longer, it's 6 o'clock maybe or something like that.
I was going to say around noon, but all right.
Now they have this brought back the Catholic tradition with the midnight mass also instead, to make people more comfortable coming. But in my childhood, we went in the morning. We were not so much church going, but I was there sometimes. And the tradition, from a lot of places in Scandinavia, you have this the morning mass for the dead. That is a myth, and it's not only in Sweden; it's also in other countries. And it's generally the tradition goes. The folkloristic story is that it's often a woman coming to the church, and she thinks she's too late for the mass, and the lights are already burning in the church. So she goes in, and a lot of people in the sitting there already, and she goes to a place and sit down, and then the priest is starting, and then she looks around and my God, that person died last year, and then she realized that there are only dead people in the church. And then an old friend to her who is dead, she said, "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. Go immediately, otherwise they will kill you." And then she runs out of church, but the dead people they try to grab, and they take part of her clothes and so on. And then later on, the people come in the morning and then they find her clothes there, and they find the soil from the dead in the benches. So it's the dead people. And it's actually a reality that until recent times in the morning in many parishes, they actually brushed the benches in the morning because the dead had been there a few hours before celebrating the mass. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
But speaking of the dead rising and because we're going to talk a little bit about this later, because we have your book here as well, Odins jakt, or Odin's wild hunt.
Odin's wild hunt would be a good translation. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to ask, because that story is somehow connected to Yule or Christmas as well. Is that correct? How and why is it connected?
Yeah, it's of course complicated as everything.
As everything else. Yes.
Yeah, but in the Swedish tradition, where Odin is quite central often, or as in my where I was a kid, it was Heathen Yule. It was Odin.
The devil.
Odin transferred to be the devil, but it's most often Odin. But if you see in Norway, for instance, it's Åsgårdsreien. That is even more Åsgårdsreien or Julereien or Asgårdsreien. That is the and that is
so Reien, is that the ghost or
Reien is like the travelers. So it's it's the dead and the unholy.
The thunder traveler.
And it's the Åsgårdsreien that is actually the unholy dead and the disturbing spirits, and actually even werewolves and dead criminals and dead soldiers and everyone coming in the air in the winter night. Midwinter night, and sometimes taking people with them. It's not apparent at the first glance that it's the same story as the Odin's hunt in Sweden, but in Sweden you have other stories also that connects it very much, and it's also spread in Germany, not least, but also in France and England actually, and all the way to India actually. So and this is connected. So it's connected to this tradition with the dead coming back during Christmas. But into the farmstead, that was the holy dead, so to speak, in Christian language. But the people out in the Christmas night, they were not a good bunch of people. You had to fear them. And it's also another interesting thing connected to that is that you can sometimes hear that, in Sweden we have this Sancta Lucia celebration on the 13th of December. And some people till today say that's the longest night of the year. And it's a lot of unholy spirits out in the air during that night. That's a very, very dangerous night. But then you have Christmas only 11 days later. But, in 1753, when they went from when they made the calendar reform,
Yes.
then we lost 11 days in Sweden. In Denmark, Norway, it was already in 1700, but it was the same thing. So 11 days were cut away. So, the things that we celebrate on Lucia today, that it's the same thing, really. It's part of the old Christmas tradition. So it's actually, you have the both traditions today in the folkloristic if you look at the 18th, 19th century, where they say both that the Lucia night, that is the longest and the most fearsome night, but it's also the Christmas night, because then you shouldn't go out on that night either. That was dangerous.
That's very interesting. So I learned something new now. Because I always thought that Lucia was always before Christmas, but now I know it wasn't.
No, and you want me to take another interesting thing in that also?
Why not?
No.
We have time.
Yeah, because that's another thing that I want. I want to kill another such tradition killer that you hear every year. That Lucia, that is Sancta Lucia, of course, the Sicilian saint. That is a Christian saint, martyr saint. And people think that Lusse, that is Lucia. But it's actually the opposite way around, because Lusse in the old tradition, that is not Sancta Lucia. Lusse or Lussekärringen, the Lussi woman, or the Lussi man sometimes. Lusse, that is a very sinister being that is out in the night, running the wild hunt. That is also connected to that night. And Lussi is a more devilish figure, but it's not the Christian devil, it's something else. Lucy is the name of the leader of this wild hunt, and that has probably made it a good occasion for the church to put Sancta Lucia on that day, because it has actually, and Sancta Lucia, she's a light saint, but if you want to speak about young traditions, the first traditional Lucia celebration we have, that was from 1764, I think it was, in the 1700s at least, in Västergötland, in a upper class milieu then. I think it was a priest or some minor nobility house, where a person describes how he was put awake in the morning by a young woman who was dressed like Lucia, as we know today. We have this tradition with Lucia, with the light,
candles in their hair. Yeah.
But that is, of course, not. It's not. Why is Lucia presented like this? It is an old light festivity, but it's the light festivity of Christmas then, of course. So that is transformed. So you have a lot of mixed up things that makes things seem more complicated than they actually are.
Yeah.
And there were actually a very good old Swedish ethnologist in the first part of or mid 20th century, Hilding Selander, who wrote 2 books in Swedish then, unfortunately for the international listeners here, but one is about the Nordic Christmas, Nordisk Jul, and he also wrote another about the pre-Christian Nordic Yule. And I would say that still today, those are the best books ever written about it.
Yeah. It's super interesting. So, yeah. Anyways, Odin.
Odin, yes.
He's, as we also already mentioned, he is closely connected to Yule.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the origins of Odin as a deity. How far back can we trace him in the first place?
Much debated question also, but I think if you have asked a normal scholar 30 years ago, they would probably have said it was probably developed during the migration period, maybe a little earlier, at least a lot of influences. But even a little bit earlier, they would have said it's probably an original Indo-European deity. Okay. And today it's turning back to that, because you can see that Odin, Wodan, Wotanas, Oder, that is actually a name that is referring to the rage and to also storms in nature, and it's a very old Indo-European word actually. But as you know, and most listeners to this I suppose know, Odin is also, he's the most enigmatic maybe of gods, because he has such a variety of different things he is connected to: war, weather, rage, mysticism, the dead, fertility.
I think one of the most interesting things actually Neil Price said this. It's fascinating that being the war god and the chief god of the Vikings or the Norse people, he was very much a god of the mind.
Yes.
So it's a very diverse character.
He is, and I think maybe you have some kind of clue in his connection actually to him being the leader of the wild hunt in some traditions, and as the Swedish, but also his connection then to the warriors, because the einherjar in the Valhalla tradition, that is the dead warriors that is connected to Odin, and they are of course the very much related to the Korjus groups, these Indo-European warriors, and they are also like an initiation, a group of warriors being initiated to this stage, and also later on initiated back to society. It's a very important tradition, and as such, if Odin is closely connected to that from the beginning, he is both, of course, connected to this initiation, this mythical transformation of people into warriors, also to be connected with the earlier dead warriors. That is an important part of these Korjus groups. They are not only living warriors, they are also personified as animals, as we know, like wolf warriors, but also they take on the identity of the dead warriors, and they are connected. They fight together with the dead warriors. That was the belief in many cases. And they act as dead people. And then you have actually a connection, at least of the war, the mysticism, and also the fury that is part of Odin, the berserker and ulvhedna, that is also the fury of those kind of warriors. That is also Odin's fury then. So I think at least some of them. And then is of course Julner also, the Christmas god.
Exactly.
And that connects him also to this that we just discussed here, about all of this Christmas tradition, when he's apparently an important part of it.
Yeah. So you mentioned also that he appears in a lot of other mythologies.
Yeah.
So which ones?
You know, if we take the most distant and the Vedic in India, that is of course one of the more discussed fields, because we have similar gods there, but we have Vata or Vajja, that is a deity that might be the same word as Wotan or Wodanas from the beginning, with the same meaning. But if we look at the deities that are mostly reminding us of Odin, then we have Indra, of course, that is mainly, I think, associated with Thor or the same things. But we also have Rudra. Rudra is quite important in this. Rudra is not etymologically the same as Wotan, and Rudra is not present very much today in Hindu mythology. But that because also that the gods, the things they are associated with is not the same as the name always, because Rudra has sons, and they are the Maruts. The Maruts are the leader of the Maruts is Indra, and the Maruts, that's the Indian version of the wild hunt. And they are connected to the Vratyas. That was the earliest Indo-European warriors that in Rig Veda comes from the north, conquering north of India with their chariots. And the Maruts could be explained as the dead warriors. At least they are fearsome bunch of beings.
Sort of einherjers as well.
Yeah, the einherjar, yes, absolutely, for the Indian version. But maybe Odin is somewhere in between Rudra, Indra, Vatya. In the later tradition, he actually takes on a lot of the things that is associated with Shiva. And the name of Shiva is not Indo-European probably. Shiva was probably worshipped before the Indo-Europeans, but in what shape we don't know. But such things occur. In India you had the high civilization before, and the Indo-Europeans came in and they actually established something long-lasting on top of that. It was already declining, this Indus Valley culture and things before that. But it was it had a rich mythology and everything. We don't know so much about it. But, the Vedic and later Hindu tradition, the Vedic is very much Indo-European, but the Hindu tradition is a mixture of both, actually. So then you have a lot of things that were colored by the earlier maybe names of the old gods and so on. Because I think if you should see someone that is very much similar of Odin, as far as we know, it's Shiva actually. He's the creator, he's the destroyer, and he is also connected to mystical things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess you already touched upon it, but so the similarities then, what do they consist of? Is it mainly attributes, or is it like physical attributes, or what he actually does for the culture?
Yeah, the hard thing when it comes to discuss the gods with the names they have in the Old Norse tradition is that is probably not the most relevant, because the gods they have also shape-shifted and name-shifted in the Scandinavian tradition. Tyr, that is not so very common in the Swedish, in the Viking Age mythology. He got his hand, Fenrir took his hand, and he is part of the Ragnarök myth and everything, where he's killed also. But Tyr, from the beginning, seems to have been the highest god. Tyr is the same name as Devas Pater, the original core Indo-European sky god. And that is Tivas is the old Germanic word for Tyr then. And that is etymologically the same word as this Devas Pater, the sky god. That is Zeus in the Greek mythology, and Jupiter then. But that's another etymologically another word.
Yeah.
But in the later tradition, he is overrun by others. So maybe Odin here also. Some of the things that are associated with Odin in the later tradition might have been associated with Tyr, but maybe not Odin in the first place. But we have another couple that is quite and that is Frey and his sister Freya.
I think that's one of the most fascinating god relations, because obviously they're not from the same family of gods.
No, and what is the families? That is also a strange thing. This the Vanir and the Aser, because that has also been disputed. This war between the gods, and it has been a theory for a long time among certain archaeologists and historians of religion, mainly then, that the Vanir were an older category of gods. But at the same time, that has been from the beginning disputed by a lot of Indo-European researchers. Georges Dumézil, the very famous French historian of religion and one of the foremost experts of Indo-European religion in the 20th century, he had this tripartition, the three-part division of Indo-European society, where you also connected the gods to the different parts of society, with the farmers, the warriors, and the upper class, then more or less similar to the basic Vedic caste system then of the society, or in the same principle. That has of course been have been disputed a lot as well. But he thought, and I think in that respect he is right, that there is not such a fundamental separation between the Asa gods and the Vanir gods.
So that it might just be a different class of gods.
Yes.
Not necessarily different families.
No, most things point to the latter, that it's a different kind of gods actually, but they are very old, both of them, because this has also been connected in archaeology, not least. If you read works from the 70s, 80s, 90s, it's a lot of often people refer to theories of historians of religion when they think it's more or less a shift of religion and ritual during the migration period or in the late Roman migration period, and that the Viking Age, Vendel Viking Age religion is something different than the early Iron Age, the Bronze Age. And that has been, it's quite, a lot of people are stuck in that still today, I would say, actually. Mainly, I think, because they haven't actually had that interest in reading the more modern history of religion works and taking part of the ongoing research. Because today, I think, of course, there is a lot of changes going on during the Roman period, migration period, not least. Yeah. But it's nothing completely new. It's the basic core, as is shown by the creation myths, and at least some of the gods that we could trace back, like Tyr and like part of Odin at least. Yeah. You could trace it back all the way to the Indo-Europeans, actually.
It's almost mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy thing, but it's fascinating to me that like Odin sort of exists in the shape of Shiva in India, but are there any of the gods like which we know as Norse gods, but that come from Indo-European traditions, such as Tyr or Freya, that are still worshipped in India, except for Shiva, or anywhere else in the world, actually?
Not as such, I would say. I would say that the Hinduistic is probably the most the tradition where you could see most traits then, because there you don't have any real break in the sense you have with the Christianization in Europe. You have it in another way in Lithuania, for instance. That was the last country in Europe, large country that was Christianized. It was in 1389, if I don't remember, when the kings of Lithuania were eventually turned into Christendom. They had big cremation rituals for Lithuanian kings in the mid-1300s. And 1389, I think the last pagan king was cremated outside Vilnius. And in the Lithuanian folklore, that is one of the richest traditions preserving ancient Indo-European traits, but it's, of course, written down very late. So when it comes to people interested in historical sources, it's often left behind because they don't touch it. One of the best works that could be read about it, I think, is, I haven't mentioned, I think, Maria Gimbutas, and she is, of course, crucial when it comes to Indo-European studies and should not be left out because she was so worked against for large parts of the 1900s. She actually put forward this Kurgan theory in 1956. She was a Lithuanian-American archaeologist born in 1921, and she died already in 94. She didn't become so old. And after the Second World War, her family and they fled to the States in time. So she was active in the United States, and she made a lot of Indo-European and a lot of things that is now so obvious when it after the ADNA revolutions. That was created actually by Gimbutas quite without knowing anything about DNA, but she was so much almost ridiculed, actually. And in 2018, I had the privilege to meet Colin Renfrew, I think one of the most famous archaeologists. He's passed away now, but the British archaeologist, professor in Cambridge, then who was he knew Gimbutas. In the 60s, they were together in the Balkans, not least. And Gimbutas was famous for two things, the Indo-Europeans and also for this early European agricultural communities, the people of the goddess, where she interpreted the mother goddess in the old pre-Indo-European religion. And Colin Renfrew was very much opposed to her research. But in the 2018 seminar we had in Uppsala, he had it also in other parts of the world. And that was to celebrate and to give her recognition once again. And he said, actually, certainly I was wrong, he said. And that was quite strong by such a person.
It is. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And Gimbuta, she was so interested in her of the folklore in her native country, Lithuania. She also wrote a book that is called The Balts, where she describes the Baltic religion also and folkloristic things. And that is quite amazing, where you actually have the same beliefs more or less as could be expressed in the wild hunt and with the Christmas with the dead, where that is also the traveling of the dead is on horseback also. That is that is quite interesting.
Yeah, especially since we already talked about it earlier, the importance of the horse to Indo-Europeans. Well, you mentioned also now that the last Lithuanian king was cremated.
Yeah.
We talked about cremation. So let's move into another one of your specialities. I mean, you have so many strings on your resume. But another one of your specialities is the connections between burials and fire.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there are two kinds of Viking Age burials. It's the inhumations, the skeleton graves or the chamber graves. And then there are the cremations. So what's the significance of fire in burials, and how is that? Can you elaborate a little bit more on how that is connected to the Indo-Europeans?
Yes, definitely. That was, I must say first, it was my starting point. I think I mentioned it, but when I didn't do my thesis about the battle axe culture, but I eventually did it about the cremation burial custom of Scandinavia and Bronze, early Iron Age mainly, but it's very much the same. And that brought me back to the Indo-Europeans because, as I mentioned earlier, the fire is very important. And when it first came to the Yamnaya, that was more tricky to connect it, actually. I was a little bit disappointed because you couldn't find the cremations, you couldn't find the fire rituals on the steppe in the earliest phase. But when you come to the Fatyanovo and to the Sintashta, not least, and then to the Vedic, Indic, and to the Baltic also, then that is also part of the Fatyanovo, then you have it. You have both cremation, you have fire sacrifice, you have sun worship. That is probably from the beginning, where the sun as a deity, that is also a basic thing actually in the Indo-European that we haven't mentioned before, but we could come back to that if we have the time. But in the Fatyanovo, so from there you have this connection, and when they start to cremate, that is very much connected to the cosmology, to the creation myth, where we have this in the Nordic version that is preserved, the giant Ymir. I think we talked about it last time also. Odin, Vile, and Ve, they separate and made the world out of his body and the body parts. And that's the same in the Indian tradition with Purusha, that is also creating the world. And in the Vedic, preserved in the Hinduic tradition, that is very much expressed till today, that when you cremate, you bring the pieces of the body back to the original elements. And as I mentioned also, I have seen a lot of cremations with my own eyes. Terje Östgård I worked with later. We started quite separate from each other with working with cremation. He in doing archaeological work in Nepal and me doing excavations in in Sweden mainly, of cremation. And then we met, and I went with him on field studies in Nepal, and then I went myself to India also to visit Varanasi and other places. And if you look at it and you interview the Brahmins in Nepal and the other people, the low castes in India who make the cremations, they have it from father to son tradition. They actually are quite aware that they do this according to the old Rigvedic texts, but they have learned them orally. They shouldn't read them. That's unclean.
I think you mentioned that last time as well. Yes. Yeah.
So it's a very, very long-lasting tradition from father to son, and they still do it. So they built the cremation pyre in 5 layers. That the basic elements. Then it's fire, water, heaven, and earth. And then a 5th element that is what we call quintessentia in the European, the 5th element, the more enigmatic thing.
Is that what they call ether as well sometimes?
Yeah. They call it ether. They actually say ether when they translate it to English.
Oh,
but as we did maybe in Europe also before. And other things also. You should put water on the fire. Quite strange, because it shouldn't. No element should take the major part. It should be connected, everything. And when you have made the cremation, you put most of the bones into water, running water, and it eventually goes away and vanish. But you take a small part of the body that is called astu. It's the same word etymologically as osteo in osteology, like the bone, a bone part.
Yes.
Could be a small part from the last remains of the pyre. And that is always buried in the ground. And that is actually the only grave you get from a real, genuine Indo-European cremation like that. And when I first saw that, because my first question that I expressed in my thesis, I made a licentiate thesis in 92 and one doctor thesis in 97. And that the strange thing, I excavated hundreds of burial cremations, burials in Sweden, and it's so few bones in it. Most often you don't have all of you have only a small part of the bones expected from a human being. It should be between 3 kilograms to 4.5 from a grown-up person if you have all of the bones. And you seldom have more than 100 gram, sometimes more. But I think the average is maybe 200 gram, but not more. And that is not only from the Bronze Age, early Iron Age. It's also actually, if you look at the Viking Age, you have a little more bones there, but not as many as you should have. So they have actually not buried everything. And that, of course, made me believe must be something similar. It's not the burial that we have so long concentrated on as archaeologists. It's a much broader ritual where the cremation in itself. And then I think the best analogy, actually I started out using the Vedic as an analogy, because in the 90s I touched upon, I said it could be some Indo-European connection, but you couldn't express that actually. I made it one more time in 2007, a book called Fire, Water, Heaven and Earth, and there I'm much more explicit about it. And I was criticized, not for my interpretation, but because of the Indo-Europeans.
because of the topic. That's so strange.
And then I had seen everything this in Nepal and in India, and I have discussed with, and I have a friend and colleague in India, Sunil Gupta. He's into the Vikings in Asia. He was visiting Neil Price and the Viking people in Uppsala earlier this winter. So I met him. Once again, and he showed me a lot of places in India as well, and we discussed this. And I think it's more than an analogy; it's so similar. So then I started to use, and Terje was very much into this also. So we started to use this as a template for interpreting Scandinavian cremation burials, and I think it fits very well. And that is, of course, it shows very well how you could work on this. You can't say, I have actual 100% proof that this is the same tradition, but there are so many things that are similar.
Yeah.
And
Maybe too much to be coincidence then.
much too much to be a coincidence. And, furthermore, it's another interesting thing. Should I continue?
Yeah, please. It's super interesting.
Now I'm going into the
For me, this is fascinating.
second breeding. It's another fascinating thing. In India and Nepal, you have this secret society, so to speak, the sadhus that we call yogis or holy persons. They are living in groups that are like sect-like groups that they wander around and go into different gods' festivals and so on. I first met them in the Shivaratri, the big Shiva festival that is in Pashupatinath outside Kathmandu in Nepal. That was in 2002. Coming tens of thousands of people from India and Nepal, hundreds, maybe thousands. It's the biggest and most holiest Shiva temple in Nepal there also at the cremation place. And these sadhus, they look so strange, it's like the fakirs, we say. And they do a lot of strange things. You wouldn't believe what they do. And some of them live on the cremations places and so on. It was a very old man. He's passed away now. He was almost 100 years then. He lived outside the cremation platforms, and Terry and me, we interviewed him about their customs, and it's so fascinating. But the thing with these sadhus, the holy persons, is that they are not cremated when they die, because they are believed to be free to go on in existence without separating in this way. That is it. This is also connected to what we call reincarnation then, but reincarnation in the original Hinduic version is not really like transmission of the soul only, as in the more popular Western way. It's this element thing that things goes into the existence once again. But these holy persons, they have ceased to be without that ritual expression, so they are actually buried in the body, inhumated, and also with their insignia. So the Vishnu groups, they have like this 3 pod in the graves also, and some other things. And they are buried at near the cremation spot, like in Pashupatinath. That is the second holiest cremation place in all Hinduism. Varanasi in India is the best, of course, with the Ganges, but Ganges River. But Pashupatinath, that is tributary to Ganges, so it's also a very holy place. And there you have this their burials at the same place, and that made me also wonder how, because sometimes you say if you have inhumations and you have cremations, it must be different beliefs. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be different status, one or another kind.
I was going to say, different classes, maybe, much like the gods, perhaps.
Maybe, because we have that already in the Bronze Age, actually. Also, if you look at the Danish burial mounds with these well-preserved bodies and clothes, with these well-built mounds where they had rituals that made them so oxygen-proof that they are still preserved inside their oak log coffins, where you also have cremation at the same time, maybe for most of people.
Aren't there even combined graves as well, with both inhumation and cremations?
Yeah, you have strange things. Sometimes, there was one that was excavated outside in the outskirts of Uppsala the other year. It's a Viking Age from the I think it's from the 11th century, where they have made a pit like an inhumation, and then they have cremated the person inside the pit, so it's only partly burnt, really.
Oh wow!
Because it's not a good thing to cremate in a pit. It doesn't
work
so good.
It's very, very difficult to cremate a human body in general, I would say. So yeah,
not actually if you know the things, because that is amazing also. But in a pit, no, not a good way. But that is such a strange thing, and you have also, of course, you don't know. sometimes some graves, but it's not a statistical evidence of it. But you also have graves that seems to have been they have taken apart the body without cremation also. So it could be other ways of separation in some cases.
Yeah.
We don't know. In the Vedic or later Hindu tradition, that is also transmitted into Buddhism, because that has the same roots. In the mountain areas of northern India and in Tibet, and also in Mongolia and in part of Central Asia that has Lamaitic Buddhism. There they also have this. They put out the corpses for the birds and animals to eat them. They have special ritual specialists to cut up the bodies, so the animals you can actually see some quite gruesome pictures on internet from that is carried out today in Western China and in Mongolia actually. So they still do it today. Terje met one of the specialists in the southern part of Himalaya 25 years ago. Then they have just stopped doing that in those days, but he was keen at doing it.
Continuing.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. I must say it's super interesting to see how these customs are connected. But you also been a part. Speaking of connecting stuff, you've also been a part of an international language and prehistory project.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So it's been going on for 6 years.
6 years. Yeah. Yes.
And now you have the final conference coming up this Thursday.
Yeah.
December 4th.
Next Thursday.
Yeah. So you're going to sum up all the results and all that stuff. So what can you tell us about the project?
Yeah, it's called LAMP, Language and Myths of Prehistory. It's a long title, LAMP project or LAMP program. We got money from Riksbanken, the Swedish National Bank, Jubilee Foundation. It's a big research founder. 6 years ago, then we got 25 million krona. That's quite a good sum. So
that sounds like a decent amount. Yeah.
And we were some. So when we applied, I was the only archaeologist, and then later on Terje joined me in this part-time also. But there were linguists from the beginning. So Jenny Larsson, who is the professor of Baltic language, is actually an Indo-Europeanist, but we don't have that professorship in Sweden at present. And people from Copenhagen University that were there, they have a quite strong Indo-European research center. So we were the core group, and then we also had David Anthony, who is one of the most famous archaeologists doing archaeology on the steppe. He was actually writing a quite influential book 2007 about the Indo-European spread that was also before this ADNA, and he was also part of the ADNA pushing to make this happen. He's, I would say, the Nestor of this today. So he's also part of it. He's in his around 80 now, so he's quite old. And we have a guy from Italy also who is a mythologist, myth researcher. And then Terje's originally Norwegian and Swedish. So it's an international group. It's not a very, very big project, but it's quite big. And
so what's the object?
Yeah, it was this ADNA that made it possible. But our goal is not to make DNA research. We have contact with the people doing it, of course. And but our objective is to fill this new template with actual knowledge about early Indo-Europeans. So the stuff I've been talking about now, that is part of it. And of course, it's also from the linguistic point of view to try to get closer to where did they speak certain languages, how did they develop, how is the connection between Germanic and Celtic languages, between Germanic and Baltic Slavic, and not least the Sanskrit or the Vedic language and the ancient Iranian and the European variants, and Yeah.
So where does the archaeology come in then?
Yeah, the archaeology come in. Of course, it's always connected with the ADNA then, but we have this we have a lot of things actually that is could be interpreted as Indo-European stuff from the battle axe culture onwards. But the problem is it was never interpreted like that for 80 years or something, mainly 70, 80 years. And now we are bringing that back. But of course, even if it's a big project, it's limited to some questions. So the things we have discussed is first to take a broader overview. What do we know today? So we made a book that is called the European Interfaces to bring things together. And then we wanted to look at the environment. In language, you could see that certain areas must be the place where you have names of plants and animals and so on that is common in every core Indo-European language. You could pinpoint some areas where certain part of the Indo-European language flora was first spoken and how they have been connected. So we wrote a book called Indo-European Archaeologist that was presented. It was published earlier this year. And now to the final conference, we will publish the third volume where we are all writing together then different articles, and that is called Indo-European Afterlife, and that is of course connected to the things we discussed now, but also in language. And I didn't mention that we have Peter Jackson, also he's a historian of religion, who is one of Sweden's best Indo-European. He actually made his thesis about the Ved and the partly about the Ashvamedha, the Indian horse sacrifice and others.
So not the director Peter Jackson?
Not that one. No.
Okay.
No, the mother of my daughter, she is a very film enthusiast. First, when I mentioned Peter Jackson, she also thought it. Well,
okay.
That sounds interesting.
But this must have been a lot of fun. Did you make any surprising or shocking revelations during this project? I mean, working together with people from different fields must have been very inspiring. Yeah,
it's inspiring. And as one other linguist who is not part of the project, but from a colleague from Belgium, he said at the conference earlier, said, how is it working with he's a linguist himself, how is it to work with the linguist? Must be frustrating, isn't it, as an archaeologist? I say, well, I don't think so. But of course, we talk different languages sometimes, or quite often. But that is also part of the things that we try to get through this. I must admit, it's not always easy, because they are often stuck, of course, in the grammatic things. And me as a non-linguist, and actually, if you had asked me when I was in school, will you someday work with linguists? I would say absolutely no, because I always thought it was fun reading and talking but I know grammatics and grammar. German grammar was my hate object.
Yeah. Grammar is not my strong suit.
No,
that's for sure.
But it's when you get into it, it's fascinating, and you can see the same way that I try to make arguments for archaeological conclusions and how things develop to the other. They make that thing in language as well.
Yeah. So going back then to the question, did you discover anything surprising or shocking or groundbreaking?
I think actually we did. I know that the linguists they have come quite a bit further in the connection between Celtic, Germanic, and also Balto-Slavic and the Vedic things. And that it's hard to say what was only our work, because during this time, this study that showed this circular or backflow to Sintashta, that it came in 21 when we already started. So that has colored a lot of things and made things put to place, so to speak. This fire sacrifice that I talked also, the book that Terje and I wrote, published at Routledge then in 2023, this Indo-European fire rituals. There we did it very much with the background in that. So it's not only our achievement, but I would say that part, when it comes to archaeology, I think it is the fire sacrifices and the relation to cremation, that is actually partly the same thing then.
Is that also what's most interesting to you for your research?
If I would take one thing, yes, because that is my most long time perspective on this. I started out as a cremation archaeologist, and now I feel I have concluded that part in quite a good way.
All right.
I'm not going to retire yet, but I think
must feel pretty good though.
It feels pretty good, I must admit that.
So can you say anything about the overall conclusions then about the project, or?
The overall conclusion is that we must continue because we have ideas working with new ideas. So it's probably not it's only the end of the beginning.
No. Just classic Churchill quote. Yes. So we already mentioned your book a little bit, but we also need to talk a little bit about it because you wrote the Odin's jakt, Odin's wild hunt.
Together with
Terje Østergaard that you already mentioned. So will this be out in English? Do you know?
We are translating it to Norwegian right now, but we will.
Close enough.
Close enough. Yeah. No. Of course, I would like to do it in a bit maybe reworked version, because this is focusing on the Odens jakt, the Swedish traditions a lot. But it's not a Swedish phenomenon. But I mean, in the ancient version, it's very, very well documented here.
Because I must say, I just started reading this, and I think it's very fascinating. It's written in a very fun and informative way, I think. So it's quite easy to take in the information, I think, and it's very educational.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah.
I really enjoy reading it, so I'm really into it right now. So
and it's really a Christmas book because it's about this winter solstice connection to it a lot.
So if you have family members who read Swedish, good Christmas gift right here. Definitely.
Yeah. But,
excuse me.
But maybe it's good that you say, because sometimes I mean we wrote this book, Werewolf Warriors and Winter Sacrifices, a few years ago. That is in English, and it's open available for everyone in open source at Uppsala University. Also me and Terje, and that inspired us a lot to this. But it's not the same book by any means. But we also mentioned this wild hunt tradition in that one. So part of it you could also be able to get in an English version there, because I think that makes the Korjos perspective of it even more broader, I think.
Yeah. But you've actually written another book quite recently as well, which I think that, because we talked about Odin's hunt in the previous episode that we did with you, but there was one book that we caught our attention here at Grimfrost that we kind of wanted to talk about. So the book is Hoga, King Bjorn and the Cradle of. Would you say the Svea Kingdom? Would that be correct? The Svea
Kingdom, Svea Kingdom, you would say that's the core of the Swedish medieval kingdom.
Which later became Sweden.
Yeah.
So Hoga is not far from Björke, right? It's fairly close.
Yeah, it's right outside Uppsala, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a massive mound. And the legend has it that Bjorn Ironside is buried there, and Bjorn Ironside then being the son Ragnar Lothbrok.
Yes.
Right. This is just recapping for everyone. So, is it the mound of Bjorn Ironside? Do we know?
No, it is not, and that we definitely know that it's not, because already in 1902, then it was excavated by the. It was initiated by the late Swedish king Gustav VI Adolf. He was a prince then, and he actually studied archaeology at my department in Uppsala. It was one of the early students. So in the autumn 1902 and the spring 1903, he studied archaeology, the basic courses that if he was today, I would have him as a teacher, but I don't know. And then the man who would become the first professor of archaeology, Oskar Almgren, was leading the department. Or it was not a department; it was part of history then. But they decided to excavate it because they thought it was the King Bjorn then who was buried there. Or that was the hypothesis, and that it maybe was something like the mounds in Old Uppsala that was excavated in 1874. And 1846. One of them is not excavated still today. But they thought might be Viking Age then, a little bit later then. But it turned out to be a Bronze Age burial when they excavated. And it was quite a strange thing, actually, because that was also such an intermediate thing. It was apparently an oak log burial in the bottom of it, but the male person buried in it was cremated, but they had put out the bones like in inhumation.
Oh.
But it was, furthermore, it was the richest Bronze Age burial in today's Sweden, actually, with the most gold objects ever found from the Bronze Age in Sweden. Not in weight, but in separate
the amount of them.
objects. So it was quite an amazing grave, actually, from 1000 BC. So it was 2000 years almost before the Viking Age then. But Oskar Almgren, when he looked into the sources another time, he saw that the Hervara saga and others that mentioned Björn at Hoga or Haugi, it doesn't say that he was buried. It says that Björn at Haugi, he had his farm at Hoga. So and that changed things, of course. So maybe Björn Ironside actually was at Hoga, but he had his farmstead there.
I see.
And the reason why we gave this book, I have been in this Svea kingdom, the cradle of it, that has been an ongoing debate for decades in Sweden, where you have in Västergötland, in the western part, people want to put the earliest kingdom there, and in Uppland, where you have Old Uppsala and the pagan center, Adam of Bremen and the described temple in the 11th century and everything. And I thought we must put this together somewhere, because this is not incomparable things. And the Sveones that was actually mentioned by Jordanes and probably by Tacitus already in the 1st century, and definitely in the 6th century by Jordanes, the man who described the Goths in his Getica in 551, where he says that the Sveones has fleets, and they export also fur and leather and such things to the Romans then, or the Byzantines, and the Sveones are interpreted as the people in Svealand in the Lake Mälaren Valley, and with Uppsala probably as a core. Stockholm today was part of the archipelago. Mälaren, this big Swedish lake, was part of the sea. So it was quite a good area for sea transports, and that's probably the reason why this is so rich during Viking Age. Then also when you have all these fleets going out from this area. But it started actually, if you look at it from geographic point of view, and from the shore displacement, that the land is rising after being pressed down by the ice during the Ice Age. So in the Viking Age, or late Viking Age, it started to be a lake. But if you go back to the Bronze Age, to the age of the Hoga mound, then you have the sea all the way into today's Uppsala. You have like the best transport route along the coastline there. So the Hoga mound is actually out in the coastal region with a very good natural harbor, probably. So and the mound, the objects in it, and the mound itself, it's very, very unique for this area. The best places to compare with is from Danish Funen, the island of Funen, Lusehöj, that's another burial mound, and the so-called King's Mound from Seddin in Brandenburg in Germany. If it had been discovered there, it would have fit in, but not up here. So this is quite unique. So this must be the first starting point for something very important. And of course, the quite speculative thing here is that we mean that at this point in history, 10,000 BC, the things that becomes the Sveones, and in the long run, Svealand, Sveavelde, it starts as a kingdom for the first time then, as a central place, and Hoga is the core of it. In the long run, it's transmitted to Old Uppsala, but that is actually in the first century's Christian era. And Hoga is not only this mound, it's the most important monument, but there are other monuments also. And the place is used during several hundred years, almost until the birth of Christ, that period. And maybe even longer, because we have Viking Age burials that also were excavated by the to-be king and Oscar Almgren. They are not so monumental, but there were 5 Viking Age mounds also excavated. So we can't actually say maybe Bjorn is actually somewhere there, because there are also mentioned other today mounds taken away in later centuries due to agriculture and other things.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But there is another thing also to this. Why could it be King Bjorn all the same? You know the story about Olaf Geirst-Alf, the Norwegian king who was after his death he was considered alv living in his tomb. He was
I think I've heard that story. Yes.
Yeah. And furthermore, he is one of the evidence that there were some kind of reincarnation belief, because they thought actually that Olaf Haraldsson, that to be Olaf the Saint Olaf, he was actually Geirst-Alv reborn before he became a Christian king. And this has, and we have this, I have my Anders, that is after my grandfather, and his after his, and so it's you name persons in the Scandinavian tradition, and they take on some part of the old dead generation's personality somehow.
Yeah.
And we think that is the speculative end of this, that maybe actually King Bjorn, he put his farmstead in Hoga because he had this monument. Maybe he didn't know the name of the person out there, but he wanted to connect to this, because that was the farm's mound in a big perspective. It was central mound.
Gives his kingdom a bit of a legitimacy.
Yes, and maybe then actually he became King Björn's mound, because it was King Björn's forefather who was there, and King Björn was an important person there. So maybe, because it seems to be a genuine tradition in this area that it was King Björn's mound, but it could be a later invention. But it was known like that at least in 1704.
Yeah.
So we know that. So that's about it. So, but the book is also about then why the Svea kingdom was created where it is, because of course that is the Sveones, the part of Sweden, not to make the Götaland, Väster and Östergötland, where I come from myself, minor part, because they were Christian before, and the king from that region actually became the early medieval kings of all of Sweden. But Uppsala was the pagan center that was actually lasting very long, up until at least 1070s, when Adam of Bremen writes about it. That was probably so important to incorporate in this early Christian kingdom, to put the archbishopry at the old cultic place.
So, but the burial mound at Munsö, then, which is also supposed to be the burial place of Bjorn Ironside. Do we know if that's connected?
No, actually, I can't say, because I don't know if this. I don't think that Bjorn Ironside is buried in Hoga. I think he lived there, and he was connected to a place, but he has probably another. And Bjorn, he should be the person that the Anska, the first Christian missionary to Sweden, then met at Björkö in Birka in Mälaren in the 820s. And in some historical works later, he's called the King of Birka and such things. But there were not such thing as King of Birka. That was probably a king for the Sviones or what they were.
So, but was Bjorn the first king of the kingdom of the Svea kingdom?
If you read the Hervara saga, at least in the version that is preserved in Uppsala, that was brought to Sweden in the 1670s, and that Olof Aurelius were translated then to Scandinavian languages. He is in an appendix there. You have all the genealogy, and there they start with him. But of course, if you want to go further, you have the Ynglinga saga and your Ynglingatal, and they are also related. But there are Swedish genealogies when you have all the kings, the mythical and the historical, and then they often start with King Björn as the first one. And he probably was a historical person, but we don't know so much more about it.
But I think I know the answer to this one, though.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask it anyway. Was he the son of Ragnar Lothbrok?
Well, why not? I would say.
Oh, really? I thought you were saying no.
No, I can't say. I don't have the answer on that. But a lot of, especially colleagues in the history and ethnology field, they are so-called source critical. They want, if they can't say something, they say no. And if they don't have any sources, they say no, it can't be older than that. We don't have any sources. But I always say like this. I worked, with the Estonian Swedish settlements in on other side of the Baltic, and there is a long-lasting impression or standpoint that they are only from the 13th century, because you have the oldest sources mentioned Swedish people in Estonia in 1291. And then they say, well, they must have come there. It was the Crusades and everything. But if you look into the sources, there is no certain evidence of a crusade. There is no certain evidence of a Swedish population coming there. I have excavated in Noerots in Nukke in Sweden, in Estonia, and you can see continuity on the Swedish settlements back to at least the migration period. No disruptions. If you have excavated such a place in Sweden, as I have done many times, and you see that kind of continuity, you wouldn't say, no, they didn't come. You have the first mention of the parish in 1271. They probably arrived there earlier. We don't know anything. That would be ridiculous. But in this case, it's not considered ridiculous, and that is strange. And I think that is very, very typical of how
it's a bit of a double standard.
It's double standard. Yeah. In this book, I want to. I could be a little bit critical to the very present Dick Harrison, the history professor in Sweden. He commented the Odin's hunt the other year in some newspaper, and I comment that as a typical example of this, because he thinks that it was Jacob Grimm in the 19th century who invented this Christmas thing with Odin's hunt and so. But it's not probable at all, because you have older mentions, but he haven't read that. And furthermore, Jacob Grimm was not inventing things. He was actually
he was collecting them.
Yeah, he was collecting them.
That's true. Even I know that.
Yeah. But it's some sort of scholarly disease that it's more honorable, so to speak, to be very critical than to be enthusiastic. And I don't think that is the way to go.
It's a slightly elitist take on it, I would say.
I would say so too, yeah. So because I'm genuinely burning for. I'm not saying that he's not burning for it. It's probably, but I mean, for me, it's since as I said last time, since childhood, I heard all this, and I'm so convinced that we have these long traditions. And of course, I could be blinding myself because I want to prove things, and I try to stop when it's like that. But when I come to the conclusion that something is really probable, then I want to convince others that it's probably so.
But it's interesting that you mentioned this, because the subtitle to the book is Archaeology in the Borderlands of Myths.
Yes.
Is it hard to separate myth and fact?
Sometimes it is, but I think when it comes to this gray zone that you don't know, then it is partly myth, of course. But the myths are not. It's not necessarily altogether free from a core of truth in it. That is also, also the big project we had now, the lamp, that is language and myths of prehistory. We don't mention archaeology because that is prehistory then, but I mean the myths, they are like some kind of entrance into interpretations of also archaeology and other things. So it's always a borderline between myth and facts, I think.
Because it's interesting, because Ragnar Lothbrok, since we mentioned him, as a character, has always been described as being possibly a mythological person, maybe even technically more than one person, historical person, put together into one. What would you say are is this what would you say to that theory?
It might well be so. I mean, I would say I think he was, in its core, the tradition goes back to a living person. I would be surprised if that wasn't the case. But as with Saint Olaf and Saint Erik in Sweden and early medieval persons, they have a lot of myths created around them that is not belonging. But it's not the same that they were not real persons. They were there, even if some persons have most probably also denied that. But it's always like that. But I think he might well have taken on also other things they have wanted to have in one person, so to speak, because that fits. And actually that is really the way we want to interpret also, as a suggestion, King Bjorn, because then we mean that he actually took on the believed identity also of this earlier person, and that then created the tradition of King Bjorn's mound then. But that was, of course, very improbable from the beginning, because Hoga, what is that? That is Haug. That is it's the name of the place.
Yes.
So that the mound was from the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very, very fascinating. And we are closing into the 2-hour mark here.
Okay.
It's been so interesting. But I'm actually kind of running out of questions, but I do have one last one for you. And we usually end our pods by asking people if they were a fly on the wall in the Viking Age, what they would like to experience and if they would like to live back then. But we already asked you this.
Yes.
So we can't do it again. So instead, this is a question we have. If you could learn the absolute truth of one of the topics that we've talked about today, which one would you like to know the most of? I mean, we talked about the cremation and that stuff that you're researching with the Lampa group and research group. We talked about Bjorn Ironside now. We talked about the Odin's hunt and the way the myth, that folklore myth has evolved and all that stuff. Like, is there one specific thing that you would like, if I could know exactly what that was, I would like to know?
Yes, there actually is one thing, but it's connected to several others, and I've discussed it so many times when I was out excavating burial grounds, when you see the traces and you wonder, what did it look like here before? Was it at all what we expect, and what do we expect? So if I could see what was actually taking place during a cremation and how was that related to the beliefs, that because then I think I would have part of the answers why it's connected to the Christmas and the wild hunt and people returning and everything. So I think it goes into many of these questions, but that I most certainly would choose, I think.
That's a good answer, I think. And especially since we're closing in on Christmas now. So.
Yes.
Such a pleasure to have you here again. Thank you so much for coming by. It's super interesting as always. And the book in Swedish and hopefully later in English, Odins Jakt, Odin's Wild Hunt. Really looking forward to finish reading this. It's going to be interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this episode, check out our other episodes on our YouTube channel, Spotify, and other podcast streaming services. And also, subscribe to support our work. Thanks for listening.